A millionaire ignored a little beggar girl who was asking for alms on Christmas Eve. Regretful, decided to follow the girl and was shocked by what he saw. Thomas, an 8-year-old boy with big, curious eyes, was sitting in the living room of the small house, setting up what he called the most beautiful Christmas tree of all. The tree was simple, with artificial branches a bit worn by time, but Thomas decorated it with such enthusiasm that it seemed to be a true work of art. The lights flickered awkwardly, and the ornaments, a collection of cracked glass balls and handmade paper stars, reflected the light magically. "Mom, look, I put the star right on top," said Thomas with a smile that lit up the room more than the tree lights. Frederica, Thomas's mother, was in the kitchen preparing a simple soup for dinner. She looked at her son and smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's beautiful, my love. You always do a great job. It's going to be the most special Christmas ever, won't it?" Frederica said, approaching the boy and giving him a warm hug. Thomas closed his eyes, feeling the lavender scent that always came from his mother, something that made him feel safe, even on the toughest nights. As mother and son exchanged smiles and immersed themselves in the magic of that moment, the sound of the front door abruptly opening cut through the tranquility of the house like a blade. The door slammed against the wall, and there at the entrance was Magnus, Thomas's father. His steps staggered, and the strong smell of alcohol invaded the environment before he even said anything. His gaze was clouded, but there was a contained fury in his features. "What the hell is this?" yelled Magnus, pointing at the Christmas tree. His voice was rough and laden with contempt. "Do you think you can play Christmas while I work like a condemned man? Where is the respect in this house?" Thomas instinctively recoiled, partially hiding behind his mother, while Frederica took a step forward, trying to stay calm. "Magnus, please don't start," said Frederica, her voice firm but controlled. "Thomas just wanted to set up the tree. He was excited about Christmas. There's nothing wrong with that." Magnus laughed, but it was a cold, joyless laugh. He took a few clumsy steps into the living room, knocking over one of the chairs in the process. "Oh, so now you want to lecture me, Frederica? Is that it?" He looked at Thomas, who watched him with wide, fearful eyes. "And you, kid? Hiding behind your mom as always. A real man doesn't do that. You need to learn to be tough or you'll end up like this decoration crap." Suddenly, Magnus pushed the Christmas tree, causing it to fall. The glass ornaments shattered on the floor, the lights went out, and Thomas let out a small scream of surprise, while Frederica extended her arm to protect him. "Stop it, Magnus! You're scaring your son!" Frederica shouted, now with a firmer tone and a defiant look. Magnus paused for a moment, looking at Frederica with an indecipherable expression, but then he took another step toward her, the tension in the room growing with each second. Thomas, still holding his mother's arm, looked at his father with tears in his eyes, wondering why Christmas, which was supposed to be magical, was turning into something so scary. Magnus pointed a trembling finger in Frederica's direction, his expression full of contempt. "You think you can defy me, Frederica? Always playing the nice one, the perfect one, as if you were better than me. You and this kid. You two think you can disrespect me in my own house." Frederica maintained her firm posture, but inside she felt her heart racing. "Magnus, I won't allow you to treat us like this. This has to stop." Her voice carried a mixture of fear and determination. She knew Thomas was watching every move, every word, and she needed to show strength, even if she was trembling inside. Thomas, who until then had remained partially hidden behind his mother, felt something inside him break. It was fear giving way to an unexpected courage, the kind of courage that only unconditional love for someone can generate. He stepped out from behind Frederica and faced his father with eyes glistening with tears but full of determination. "You can't talk to Mum like that," Thomas shouted, his voice trembling but firm. "She didn't do anything wrong. And you're the one ruining everything." Before Magnus could respond, Thomas pushed him with all the strength his little arms could muster. The impact was enough to make Magnus stagger a few steps back, caught off guard by his son's act. For a moment the room fell silent, the air charged with tension. Magnus looked at Thomas and his expression changed from surprise to pure rage. "So, that's how it is, kid?" Magnus roared, advancing towards the boy. "You want to meddle where you weren't called? Want to play the tough guy now, is that it?" He grabbed Thomas by the arm, ignoring Frederica's desperate protests. You need to learn a lesson about respect. Magnus, let him go now. You're going too far, Frederica shouted, trying to interpose herself between the two. But Magnus gently pushed her aside, not with enough force to hurt her, but enough to leave her powerless at the moment. Magnus dragged Thomas down the hallway to the boy's room. Thomas struggled, trying to break free, but his father was much stronger. If you don't know your place, you'll learn here, Magnus shouted, opening the door to the room and pushing Thomas inside. The boy stumbled, nearly falling to the floor. Stay here until you learn to respect me. With a harsh motion, Magnus slammed the door and locked it from the outside. Thomas ran to the door, pounding with his small fists. Dad, please let me out. I didn't do anything wrong, please, he pleaded, his voice laden with desperation. Frederica from the other side of the hallway ran to Magnus, her eyes filled with fury and fear. How could you do this, Magnus? He's just a child. Open that door right now, she said, trying to take the key from his hand. He needs to learn, Frederica, Magnus replied, his voice hard. He needs to know that he can't go around defying his father. This boy will respect me, even if it's by force. Thomas kept pounding on the door, his sobs growing louder. Frederica looked at her trapped son on the other side of the door, then at Magnus, and knew she had to find a way to get him out of that situation before it was too late. Frederica couldn't contain her anger. With her heart racing, she advanced on Magnus, trying to snatch the key he held firmly in his hand. You're a monster, she shouted, her voice laden with pain. How can you do this to your own son? He doesn't deserve this, and you know it. Magnus, inebriated with rage and alcohol, recoiled for a moment, but soon began shouting back. You think you can tell me what to do in my own house? You don't give the orders here, Frederica. The exchange of words turned into an even more intense argument, with the two of them shouting at the same time, their voices echoing through the halls of the small house. Suddenly, Magnus grabbed a plate that was on the nearby table and threw it to the floor, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. You want to argue with me? Is that what you want? He shouted, his voice hoarse with fury. Frederica didn't back down. She grabbed another plate from the kitchen and threw it against the wall in a gesture of despair and accumulated anger. You're not going to treat us like this anymore, Magnus. Never again. Plates began flying around the house, each one shattering with a sound that seemed like a scream in the silence that followed. Thomas, on the other side of the door, heard everything, his eyes wide with fear as he pounded uselessly on the wood. Mom, Dad, stop, please, he pleaded, his voice choked. But the fight continued, with objects being knocked over and cutting words being thrown like knives. Suddenly, everything fell silent. Frederica was panting, her face marked by tears and splashes of water from the broken plates. Magnus had stopped, looking at the chaos they had created in the living room. The shards glistened on the floor, reflecting the dim lights of the fallen Christmas tree. He stood there, his breathing heavy and uneven, as if trying to regain control over himself. The silence was almost unbearable. Thomas, from the other side of the door, whispered softly, Mum, is everything okay? But received no answer. Frederica looked at Magnus, her eyes fixed on him, but her expression changed from fear to something deeper, as if something had broken inside her. Magnus, in turn, seemed confused, lost in his own thoughts. Magnus opened the bedroom door with a harsh motion, and Thomas ran out, his eyes wide with worry as he searched for his mother. The boy's heart seemed to want to jump out of his chest, pounding with an erratic rhythm. He looked at the living room, where moments before there had been only shouts and broken plates, and what he saw made his world crumble. Frederica was lying on the floor, motionless, with blood slowly trickling, creating a stain that seemed to grow with each passing second. Thomas froze in place, his eyes fixed on his mother's body, not fully understanding what was happening, but feeling the weight of a pain that no child should have to bear. Mom? He murmured, his voice low, as if trying to bring her back with a word. Stop looking at her, Magnus shouted, his voice hoarse and full of fury. He approached Thomas, pointing a threatening finger at him. Get out of here, now, before I do the same to you. Magnus's words were like a direct blow to Thomas's chest. He took a step back, stumbling over his own feet and then another, until he finally turned and began to run. He desperately wanted to hug his mother, wake her up, bring her back in any way he could, but he knew he couldn't. Magnus's voice echoed in his mind like a constant threat, and fear took over every fiber of his small body. Thomas ran out the front door, feeling the cold night air hit his face. Tears flowed freely, but he couldn't stop. His heart was shattered, but his feet carried him away, each step a silent scream of despair. He looked back one last time, seeing the house that had once been his home, now a place of terror and pain. "Mom," he whispered, almost inaudible as he continued running down the dark street. He wanted to go back, to hug her one last time, but fear and despair pushed him forward, taking him further and further away from that place that was no longer a home. Thomas was running through the snow, his bare feet sinking into the frozen ground, while the cold cut his face like invisible blades. The wind seemed to whisper his name, but he didn't know if it was real or just the echo of despair that gripped his mind. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the cold air and leaving marks on his reddened skin. He sobbed as he ran, the sound of his own footsteps muffled by the white layer beneath his feet. "Mum, why?" Thomas murmured as he ran, his voice lost in the frozen void of the night. "Why did this happen? What do I do now?" He was just a child, his heart crushed by tragedy and fear, trying to find an answer amidst the chaos. Each step seemed heavier, and the snow seemed to swallow his strength, but he kept going because stopping meant facing the void. The streets were deserted, the distant lights of houses shining like small promises of warmth and safety, but none seemed within reach. He didn't know where to go. Thomas cried, his sobs punctuated by the cold and exhaustion. He felt utterly alone, a small body lost in a world that suddenly seemed so vast and cruel. After what seemed like an eternity, Thomas saw a simple building with a faint light at the entrance. It was a shelter, recognizable by the worn sign that said Santa Esperanza Community Shelter. He stopped, his feet almost frozen, his body shivering with cold and fear. For a moment he hesitated, the fear of entering almost as great as the fear of continuing to run. "I have nowhere else to go," he murmured to himself, trying to gather courage. Thomas took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs, and took a tentative step towards the shelter's door. As he pushed it, the small bell at the top of the entrance rang, announcing his arrival. Inside, the welcoming warmth of the place contrasted with the cruel cold outside. Thomas stopped in the hallway looking around, his eyes still full of tears. Some people sitting on benches watched him, but no one said anything at first. Finally, a woman with a kind expression and a worn apron approached him. "Hi, dear," she said, her voice soft. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The question made Thomas's chest tighten even more, and he shook his head, unable to speak. All he could do was let out a loud sob, before falling to his knees on the floor, exhaustion finally overcoming fear. The woman knelt beside him, gently placing her hands on his shoulders. "It's okay. You're safe here. We'll take care of you." As Thomas was embraced by the warmth of the shelter and the woman's soothing voice, he felt a small spark of hope for the first time. But deep in his mind, the weight of what he had left behind still haunted him, and he knew his story was far from over. 2 days had passed since Thomas arrived at the shelter, but to him time seemed to have no meaning. He barely spoke to the people around him, spending most of his time sitting in a corner, staring at nothing. His eyes, once bright with curiosity, were now dull, as if they had lost all light. He refused food, pushing the plate aside, and avoided any conversation. That morning, the activity at the shelter was different. People were excited, decorating the place with lights and ornaments. There was an improvised Christmas tree, with garlands made of paper and some donated gifts piled around it. Thomas watched it all from a distance, not approaching. The red of the ribbons and decorations made his stomach churn, bringing back memories he tried so hard to bury. One of the caregivers, the same woman who welcomed him on the night he arrived, approached him with a gentle smile. "Thomas, we're setting up the tree. Do you want to help? You can choose where to put the ornaments." He vigorously shook his head, his face contorted into an expression of rejection. "I don't like Christmas," he said, his voice low but filled with determination. "I don't want to help. I don't want to know about it. Christmas is horrible." The woman sat down beside him, respecting the space between them. "You don't have to help if you don't want to, dear. But can I ask why you think Christmas is horrible?" Thomas was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the ground. When he finally answered, his voice was almost a whisper. Because anything red reminds me of blood. It reminds me of bad things. He began to play with a loose thread on his shirt, avoiding looking at the caregiver. Christmas isn't special. It's just another day. The woman sighed, her heart tight with the pain she saw in those words. She reached out and gently touched Thomas's shoulder. You know, Thomas, Christmas can be many things. For some people, it's just an ordinary day. But for others, it's an opportunity to start over. No matter what happened before, you can always choose what you want to do with the now. Thomas didn't respond, but his eyes were filled with tears. He quickly wiped them away with the sleeve of his shirt, as if he wanted to hide his vulnerability. I don't want to start over. I want everything to go back to how it was before. The caregiver nodded, respecting his silence. I understand. And it's okay if you're not ready. Just know that when you are, we'll be here for you. As Christmas unfolded around him, with laughter and carols filling the shelter, Thomas remained isolated, struggling with his own thoughts. Deep down, he knew something needed to change, but the weight of memories kept him trapped, and at that moment he still didn't know if he would ever be able to break free. That night, as the noise of Christmas celebrations filled the shelter, Thomas finally spoke. He was sitting in a corner away from the decorated tree, while the caregiver watched him from afar, noticing the whirlwind of emotions that seemed to grow inside him. She approached, sitting beside him again, this time without trying to push him. Thomas took a deep breath, his voice coming out as a heavy whisper. My mother died, he said suddenly without looking at the caregiver. His hands were trembling, and he gripped his knees tightly as if trying to hold on to the little control he still had. It was my father. He killed her. The caregiver was shocked, her face frozen for a moment as she tried to process what she had just heard. Thomas, she began in a low, careful voice. Are you sure about this? What happened, dear? Her hand rested gently on his shoulder, offering comfort. Thomas began to cry, tears falling silently as he nodded affirmatively. He was drunk. He came home and started arguing with my mother. I was there, but he locked me in the room. After I saw her on the floor with blood. He told me to leave, said he would do the same to me if I stayed. I ran. I had to run. The caregiver felt her heart squeeze as if it were being squeezed. She looked at the boy, so small and vulnerable, carrying a weight no one should bear. Thomas, I'm so sorry about that. You were very brave to tell me this. Now we need to do something. We need to make sure you stay safe and that justice is served. Thomas did not respond. He just kept crying as she got up and walked quickly to the shelter's office. Picking up the phone, she called the police, reporting everything Thomas had told her. We need an on-site investigation. The child is safe here, but the father is missing and the mother. We need to know what happened. A few hours later, the police arrived at the shelter to gather more information. Thomas, still shaken, told everything again, though the words were hard to come out. The caregiver remained by his side, holding his hand the whole time. The officers promised to investigate and set off for the house where it had all happened. On site, the officers found a devastating scene. The house was abandoned with signs of struggle and marks on the floor that confirmed Thomas's story. However, Frederica's body was no longer there. A nearby neighbor said an ambulance had taken the body 2 days earlier after residents reported screams and sudden silence. Frederica had already been buried, and the burial had taken place quickly, without any family present to pay their respects. Meanwhile, Magnus's whereabouts were a mystery. He had disappeared completely, leaving the police on alert and Thomas with a growing fear. Your father is a fugitive, one of the officers told the caregiver the next day. We will continue searching, but the priority now is to ensure the boy is safe. He is a key witness and the suspect may try to contact him. Thomas overheard the conversation between the caregiver and the police from a distance, his heart racing with every word. He knew his father was still out there somewhere, and the thought filled him with fear. As the caregiver hugged him to reassure him, all he could think of was one thing. When would his father find him? Over the years, Thomas found in the shelter more than just a roof and food. He found an opportunity to start over. Despite the emotional scars he carried, he began to get involved in the activities offered by the place, especially those that awakened his creativity. He loved to paint, create figures with paper, and even fix broken objects, finding beauty and value in things others considered lost. The caregiver, who remained a constant presence in his life, encouraged him to explore this creative side. "Thomas, you have a special talent," she would say, watching as he worked on a sculpture made from recycled materials. "With that imagination and determination, you can go very far. You just need to believe in yourself." Those words stuck with him, planting a seed that would grow into something much bigger over time. Even after leaving the shelter at 18, Thomas took with him the lesson that it was always possible to transform something bad into something beautiful. He worked various jobs to support himself, but never abandoned his passion for creativity. He started small, selling handmade pieces and exclusive designs online. Each sale was a step towards the dream he had silently nurtured for years. Over time, Thomas began to gain notoriety. His creations caught attention for their originality and sustainable use of materials. He founded his own company, initially focused on sustainable design and creative products made from recycled materials. "Transforming what was discarded into something everyone desires" was the motto he carried with him, inspired by his own story of overcoming adversity. The company grew rapidly, and Thomas stood out as a young entrepreneur with an innovative vision. He began to employ other people with similar stories to his, giving them a chance to start over, just as he had in the past. Over time, his brand became a symbol of transformation and resilience, gaining national recognition and eventually international acclaim. At 32 years old, Thomas was already a millionaire, but his essence remained the same. He made a point of regularly visiting the shelter where he had grown up, offering financial and emotional support to the children who, like him once, were trying to find their place in the world. He also maintained close contact with the caregiver who had welcomed him, always expressing his gratitude. Years after becoming a successful businessman, Thomas had changed in a way that many did not expect. Since the death of the caretaker who welcomed him as a child, something within him had closed off. The grief, combined with the pressure of success, transformed his gentle personality into something harder and more demanding. He did not admit failures and seemed increasingly distant from the essence that had guided him there. The man who once inspired so many people had now become a severe boss who did not hesitate to dismiss candidates or employees for trivial reasons. On an ordinary morning, Thomas was in his office reviewing resumes for an important vacancy. He looked at the documents with the impatience of someone who no longer cared so much about human potential. When a man entered for the interview, Thomas glanced up briefly, evaluating him coldly. The candidate was a middle-aged man with a calm and gentle expression, simple but well cared for clothes. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas. My name is Magnus." "Thank you for the opportunity," said the man, extending his hand. The name made Thomas harden the instant he heard it. He dropped the resume on the table and crossed his arms, the expression on his face changing to something closed and almost hostile. "Magnus?" he repeated, as if the sound of the word offended him. The man, confused, nodded with a slight smile, trying to understand the reaction. "Yes, sir, my name is Magnus. Any problem?" he asked, still maintaining a polite posture, despite the tension that was beginning to grow in the environment. Thomas leaned forward, staring at the candidate with penetrating eyes. "Yes, there is a problem," he said, his voice laced with disdain. "I don't trust anyone with that name. The interview is over." The statement was as direct as it was cruel, leaving the man clearly disconcerted. "But Mr. Thomas," Magnus tried to argue, "we haven't had a chance to discuss my qualifications. I came prepared, and I believe I can contribute a lot to your company." Thomas raised one hand, cutting off the man's speech. "I don't need to hear anything else," he said coldly. "If your name is Magnus, you have no place in this company. Don't waste my time." Thomas's tone was inflexible, making it clear that there would be no negotiation. The candidate hesitated for a moment, his eyes showing the disappointment and perplexity he felt, but ended up slowly getting up. He held the resume firmly, and without saying anything else, left the room. When the door closed, Thomas took a deep breath, running his hand through his hair. He looked at the table full of papers, but his mind was elsewhere. The name Magnus echoed in his mind, bringing back memories he preferred to forget. The figure of his father, the screams, the blood. Everything came back like a shadow that never left him in peace. He rose abruptly, walking around the office as he tried to shake off the weight of those memories. But he knew that no matter how much he ran, Those wounds would always find him again. It was a week before Christmas, and the atmosphere at Thomas's company was different. The employees, seeking some lightness at work, started to put Christmas decorations in the offices and hallways. A small tree was set up in the reception area, adorned with colorful lights and stars, while garlands decorated the walls. The mood was lively, with conversations about plans for the holidays and gift exchanges. However, the atmosphere changed dramatically when Thomas entered the office. He stopped at the entrance, his eyes fixed on the Christmas tree. For a moment, the environment fell silent. Thomas took a deep breath, his expression hardening as he looked around at the decorations. "What is this?" he asked, his sharp voice echoing through the space. The employees, who had been chatting animatedly before, fell silent immediately, exchanging nervous glances. One of them, braver, tried to answer. "Mr. Thomas, we thought it would be nice to bring some Christmas spirit to the office. It's just a way to brighten up the atmosphere." Thomas took a step forward, his presence dominating the room. He pointed at the tree with a sharp gesture, his eyes narrowed. "Christmas spirit? Brighten up the atmosphere? This is an office, not a year-end party." His voice grew louder, filled with irritation. "Who gave permission to put this here? I want everything removed immediately. Every decoration, every little light. I don't want any of this in my offices." The employees began to move quickly, removing the decorations with dejected looks. Thomas, however, didn't stop. "Do you think you have time to play Christmas while there's work piling up? Do you think this is an amusement park? If I see one more decoration, whoever put it up will be fired on the spot. You're here to work, not to hang garlands." One of the employees, clearly uncomfortable, tried to justify herself. "Mr. Thomas, we just wanted to create a lighter, more welcoming atmosphere. It wasn't our intention to bother you." Thomas turned to her, his expression full of disdain. "Welcoming? Light? This is not your home. If you want to decorate something, do it at your homes. Here I expect seriousness and professionalism." Silence took over the room again as the employees gathered the last decorations. Thomas watched them with his arms crossed, his posture rigid as if he wanted to make it clear that he wouldn't tolerate any more attempts at celebration. The air was heavy, and the enthusiasm that once filled the atmosphere had completely disappeared. When Thomas returned to his office, he slammed the door, trying to ignore the disapproving looks he felt on his back. Sitting at his desk, he looked at the calendar, the circle around Christmas Day seeming to mock him. He averted his gaze, but the memories began to invade his mind, bringing with them a pain he refused to face. Days passed after the decoration incident, and employees couldn't help but comment among themselves about Thomas's behavior. Despite the rigid and arrogant posture he displayed, many believed that something deeper was behind his rejection of Christmas. "Maybe he went through something really difficult during this time of year," one of the employees commented during lunch. "He seems more sad than angry, even though he tries to hide it." Others agreed, and as Christmas approached, they decided it was time to try something different. 5 days before Christmas, while Thomas was working in his office, the employees put their plan into action. They gathered simple and discreet decorations and set up a small surprise party in the meeting room. A Christmas tree was decorated with soft lights, and some Christmas treats were arranged on a table. The atmosphere was cozy, but not overstated. "It's just a gesture to show that we care," one of them said, adjusting the lights. "Maybe he'll realize that we're not trying to disrespect him." When everything was ready, one of the employees called Thomas to the meeting room, saying there was something important to discuss. Thomas, unsuspecting, got up with an impatient expression and followed the employee. Upon opening the door, he was greeted by a shy chorus of "Surprise!" and the smiling faces of his team. He stopped immediately, looking at the decorations and the small tree. For an instant, it seemed he didn't know how to react. "Mr. Thomas," one of the employees began with a nervous smile, "we know you've been against the decorations, but we thought this time of year is about unity and new beginnings. We wanted to do something special for you, to show how much we value everything you've built here." The silence that followed was deafening, as if every breath in the room had been sucked away by the tension. Thomas remained motionless for a few seconds, his eyes slowly wandering among the faces of his employees and the carefully arranged decorations. For a brief moment, his expression seemed indecipherable, as if struggling to process what he was seeing. Then something shifted. What started as surprise quickly gave way to a contained fury, growing in his eyes like a storm about to erupt. He took a step forward, pointing to the decorated Christmas tree in the center of the room. The movement was abrupt, almost violent, as if he wanted to tear the image before him with the mere gesture. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice low but laced with an indignation that reverberated through the air. Each word seemed cutting, hitting the employees like a blade. "I clearly said I didn't want anything related to Christmas here. Who was the genius who thought it would be a good idea to disrespect my orders?" The employees' faces mingled between confusion and panic. No one seemed to have the courage to speak until a visibly nervous employee took a hesitant step forward. "Mr. Thomas, it wasn't our intention to disrespect you," she began, her voice trembling but still trying to remain calm. "We just thought—" Thomas raised his hand abruptly, cutting her off mid-sentence. "You thought?" he repeated, with a tone of irony that made his words even sharper. "You think you can make decisions for me? Do you think I'm someone who accepts excuses for disobedience? I said I didn't want any of this here. You all ignored my instructions. This is not just a party, it's an act of insubordination." His voice rose in volume, filling the room with an authority that didn't allow for contestation. The atmosphere, which had once been one of timid joy and expectation, was now completely charged with tension. The glow of the tree's lights seemed pale in the face of the coldness emanating from Thomas. He looked at each of those present, his eyes scanning their faces with an expression of disgust and disapproval. "You're all fired," he declared, his voice firm and emotionless. "I don't need a team that doesn't know how to respect the rules. You can gather your things and leave immediately." The employees were in shock. The gesture they had planned so carefully, in the hope of bringing a little joy to the boss they so admired, had turned into an absolute disaster. Some tried to argue, but Thomas raised his hand again, silencing any attempt at conversation. "I don't want to hear anything else," he said, his voice hard and final. "You have until the end of the day to clear your desks. And for everyone's sake, leave without causing any more problems." As the employees gathered the decorations and prepared to leave, the atmosphere grew heavy with murmurs of frustration and sadness. Thomas, on the other hand, showed no sign of remorse. He turned his back on the room and returned to his office, slamming the door with such force that the sound echoed through the silent hallways. Sitting at his desk, Thomas breathed heavily, leaning his elbows on the wood and rubbing his face with his hands. He tried to ignore the weight he felt in his chest, as if a voice inside him insisted on reminding him of what he had just done. His eyes fell on the calendar on the wall, where Christmas Day was marked. He quickly averted his gaze as if unable to bear the sight of the date. As the silence enveloped him, Thomas began to question himself. Why had he reacted that way? Why couldn't he just ignore Christmas as he always did? And more importantly, why did the sight of a decorated tree and happy people make him so furious, so vulnerable? He knew the answer, but he wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. Meanwhile, in a small neighborhood far from the city center, 8-year-old Odette sat on the cold living room floor, hugging her legs while watching Reuben, her adoptive father, sink deeper and deeper into a bottle of alcohol. Reuben was a man around 60 years old, his face marked by time and his eyes always red, a result of the nights he spent between sips and hangovers. He was the only one responsible for her since he had adopted her 2 years ago. But this gesture, which should have been one of love and care, had turned into a burden that he made sure to remind her of at every moment. Odette looked at the bottle in Reuben's trembling hands as he took another sip and slammed the container down on the worn table with force. The sound echoed through the silent house, and she recoiled a little, startled. The strong smell of alcohol permeated the environment, mixed with the odor of cigarettes that Reuben smoked incessantly. "Look at you, sitting there as if the world revolves around you," he grumbled, his voice slurred and bitter. "You should be grateful for everything I've done for you, girl. I took you out of that damn institution, and what do I get in return? Nothing." She lowered her head, staring at her own feet as silent tears streamed down her cheeks. Reuben always repeated these words, and each time she heard them, the weight in her little heart grew heavier. I am grateful, Dad," she responded, almost in a whisper, trying not to irritate him further. Her voice was weak but sincere. I just wish there was food for us today. Reuben let out a bitter laugh, picking up the bottle again and taking another sip. Food? Food is what you want? Then go to work and earn your own food. He slammed his hand on the table, knocking over an ashtray full of ashes onto the floor. I already do too much for you. Do you think money grows on trees? If it weren't for me, you'd still be in that filthy place. Odette pressed her lips to avoid crying out loud. She knew that answering would only make things worse, but hunger was a constant ache, and her stomach growled so loudly that it seemed to mock her attempt to be invisible. Reuben kept complaining, now talking to himself, as the bottle quickly diminished. She watched the movement of his hands, fearing the moment when he would become even more aggressive, as had happened before. The cold of the night came in through the poorly sealed window, and Odette hugged herself more tightly, trying to find some comfort in the warmth of her own body. All she wanted was a normal life, where she could go to school without fear, and where Christmas meant something beyond shouting and humiliation. But at that moment, her dreams seemed as distant as the warmth that was lacking in her home. While Reuben sank deeper into alcohol, Odette, in silence, promised herself that one day she would leave there, that she would find a way to escape that cycle of pain. But for now, all she could do was wait and hope that the night would pass without anything worse happening. Reuben dropped the bottle with a thud on the table, his half-closed eyes looking at Odette, who was still huddled in the corner of the room. "If you're hungry, girl, then go do something useful," he said, his voice slurred by alcohol but with a tone that carried an unmistakable threat. He pointed to the door with an abrupt gesture. "Go out on the street and beg for money. Someone will give you a few coins and then you can buy your damn food." Odette looked up at him, and tears were already starting to stream down her rosy cheeks from the cold. She knew Reuben was serious. "Dad, please don't send me out," she pleaded, her voice trembling, almost inaudible. "It's so cold outside, and I'm scared. What if no one helps me? I don't want to go." Reuben struggled to his feet, staggering, but maintaining a posture that seemed even more threatening because of the alcohol. "You think you can talk to me like that?" he shouted, taking a step toward her. "I'm the only reason you have a roof over your head. I took you out of that place. You should be thanking me on your knees every day. Now do as I say." "Please, no," Odette whimpered, hugging her own legs and curling up even more. "I'll freeze and no one will give me anything. I don't want to go, Dad. Please don't make me." Reuben approached her, leaning down to look her in the eye, the strong smell of alcohol and cigarettes making Odette turn her face away. "I said go," he roared, grabbing her arm tightly. "If you don't go, ungrateful girl, you won't eat anything ever again. And you can bet I won't be nice to you. Now get up and get out." The words cut Odette like knives. She knew she had no choice. Reuben wouldn't give up, and any attempt to defy him would only make the situation worse. With a heavy heart and a tear-stained face, she slowly got up, dragging her feet to the door. The icy wind was already seeping through the crack, and she felt the cold hit her thin body as if it wanted to swallow her whole. Reuben stood in the doorway, crossing his arms as he watched her leave. "And don't come back empty-handed," he said, his voice cutting. "If you think it's hard now, you'll see what's hard if you come back empty-handed." Odette went out into the cold night, the wind cutting her skin as she walked the deserted streets. Her tears froze on her face, and her tiny footsteps echoed in the icy silence. She didn't know what to do, but she knew she had to try, because at that moment, there was no one who could save her. Odette walked the cold street, the icy wind cutting her face like invisible knives. Her small hands trembled as she held an old can that Reuben had given her to collect the money. The streets were deserted, but now and then someone would rush by, protected by thick coats and hats, completely ignoring the girl's presence. Each person who ignored her made the knot in her throat tighten even more. "Please, sir, can you help me with a few coins?" Odette asked in a low, trembling voice, holding out the can to a hurried man in a suit. He didn't even look at her, swerving as if she were invisible. The rejection hurt more than the cold. "I just need a little to buy food," she whispered to herself, trying to hold back tears. Further on, Odette approached a well-dressed woman carrying bags of gifts. "Ma'am, please, I'm hungry. Can you help me?" The woman stopped, looking her up and down with an expression of disgust. "Children like you should be at home, not out here bothering people," the woman said, before continuing on her way, leaving nothing but cutting words behind. Odette stood still, her face flushed not only from the cold but from shame. "I don't want to be here," she thought, gripping the can tightly, "but I have no choice." She took a few more steps. Approaching a man smoking leaned against a pole. "Sir, can you help me? I just need a little to eat," she asked, her voice growing weaker with each word. He laughed, shaking his head. "Go home, girl. No one has anything for you here." He flicked his cigarette into the snow and walked away, leaving her alone once again. The hours seemed to drag on, and Odette could no longer feel her toes. The intense cold seemed to consume her energy, and exhaustion took over her small body. She tried again, this time approaching a couple walking arm in arm. "Excuse me. Please, I'm hungry," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. The man brushed her aside with an abrupt gesture. "Do you think we're a bank? Go find someone else." With each rejection, the despair grew. Odette sat on the curb, hugging her knees as tears streamed down her face. "Why doesn't anyone care?" she whispered, looking at the nearly empty can. Only a few coins rattled at the bottom, barely enough to buy a piece of bread. As she sat trying to find the strength to continue, the cold wind grew even stronger and night began to fall. Odette looked up at the sky, unsure of how she would return home or if she could face Ruben's fury upon returning nearly empty-handed. While Odette remained seated on the curb, holding the can with some coins, a teenager passed by her. He seemed in a hurry, but upon noticing the girl and her can, he stopped for a moment. Odette looked at him unsuspecting, until suddenly the boy reached out and snatched the can from her hands. "Hey, that's mine!" Odette shouted, leaping to her feet. Her small legs were tired and sore from the cold, but adrenaline took over her body. The teenager was already running down the street, holding the can with the coins she had struggled so hard to get. "Please give it back, I need that," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face as she ran after him. Odette's steps were clumsy, sinking into the snow covering the sidewalk. The cold wind hit her face, further obscuring her vision. She sobbed loudly as she ran, her lungs burning with the effort. "Please don't do this to me," she shouted again, her voice lost on the empty street. The teenager glanced back for a moment, but didn't stop. He laughed, as if it were just a prank, and quickened his pace even more. Odette, desperate, stumbled and fell into the snow, her hands burying themselves in the ice as she tried to get up. "I need that," she murmured, her sobs growing more intense. "Please, I can't come back without it." Even with the biting cold and exhaustion consuming her, Odette got up and kept running. Her feet, already nearly frozen, seemed to disobey her, but she couldn't give up. The memory of Ruben's face haunted her, his words echoing in her mind. "Don't come back empty-handed." She knew what it meant to disobey him, and fear propelled her. The teenager turned the corner, and Odette, already out of strength, staggered as she reached the same point. She stopped, looking in all directions, but the boy had vanished. The can with the coins that was her only hope was lost, and Odette fell to her knees in the snow, crying with a despair that seemed endless. Odette, exhausted, and with her face frozen by the tears that wouldn't stop flowing, continued walking through the dark streets. She no longer knew how to get back home, and the cold seemed crueler with each step. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and despair grew with every person who ignored her. She tried to approach those who passed by, but no one stopped to listen to the trembling voice of the girl. "Please, sir, just a few coins," she would say repeatedly, like a scratched record, no longer even knowing if anyone was listening. With each refusal, her heart seemed to break a little more, but she continued, driven by the fear of returning empty-handed. When she was about to give up, she saw a well-dressed, serious-looking man walking quickly on the opposite sidewalk. It was Thomas, whose cold, distant expression betrayed no emotion. Odette didn't know who he was, but saw a new opportunity there. She hurriedly crossed the street, nearly tripping on the snow, and stopped in front of him, extending her empty hands. "Sir, please, it's the 24th, almost Christmas," she pleaded, her voice low and trembling. "I just need a few coins to buy something to eat. Anything helps." Her large eyes were filled with tears, and she looked at him with a mixture of hope and despair. Thomas stopped for a moment, looking at the girl with a hardened expression. The word Christmas echoed in his mind like a bitter memory, bringing forth emotions he preferred to bury. He narrowed his eyes, taking a step back. "Christmas?" he repeated, his voice cold. "You think Christmas is going to solve your problems?" I don't think begging on the street is going to change anything. But, sir, Odette tried to respond, her voice failing as she struggled against the tears that insisted on falling. Her throat was dry and her words came out choppy from the cold and emotion. Thomas, however, didn't give her a chance to continue. He raised his hand in an impatient gesture, his cold eyes fixed on her, as if dealing with something he despised. "Stop using Christmas as an excuse for your situation," he snapped, his voice harsh and without compassion. "Do you think Christmas is going to solve your problems? That people will feel sorry for you just because it's this time of year? The world isn't kind, girl. Learn that now. No one is going to help you, no matter how much you beg." Odette recoiled slightly, as if his words were a physical blow. Her gaze fixed on the ground as she pressed her hands to her chest, trying to contain the sobs that threatened to escape. Thomas looked at her for a few more seconds, his face rigid, before abruptly turning away. He began walking down the street without looking back, his steps firm and determined, as if he wanted to get away from that scene as quickly as possible. Odette remained standing where she was, the icy wind whipping her face and mingling with the tears that flowed uncontrollably. Thomas's words echoed in her mind like a hammer, crushing any hope she had left. "No one is going to help you," she murmured softly, repeating the words he had said. She looked at her empty hands, the same ones that held so little but meant everything to her that night. "Is it true? Will no one ever help me?" The girl took a deep breath, trying to compose herself, but the cold seemed crueler now, as if Thomas's words had made the night even darker. Still, she began to walk again, her steps hesitant and slow. Each movement seemed a superhuman effort, but she knew she couldn't stop. She needed to keep going, needed to try. Perhaps somewhere there would be someone willing to listen. While Thomas walked down the street, his mind invaded by an uneasy feeling. The scene of the girl in the snow with eyes full of despair wouldn't leave his head. He tried to push the thoughts away, telling himself it wasn't his responsibility. "I did the right thing," he thought, quickening his pace. "I can't get involved with other people's problems. Everyone needs to learn to deal with difficulties on their own." But the feeling of discomfort didn't go away. Each step seemed heavier, and the memory of his own childhood marked by hunger and rejection began to seep into his mind. He remembered the cold nights, the looks of disdain, and the times he too had begged for help, only to be ignored. Thomas's heart, hardened by years of pain and self-protection, began to waver. He stopped for a moment, looking at the deserted street ahead. The snow fell silently, covering the footprints he had left. Thomas took a deep breath, trying to push the thoughts away, but something inside him told him that girl was more than just a passing encounter. And for the first time in years, he wondered if he had made the wrong decision. On the 25th of December, while most families celebrated Christmas at home, the workers at Thomas's company arrived at the office with expressions of exhaustion and discouragement. They had received a clear and inflexible order at the beginning of the week. "No one takes time off at Christmas. I want everyone here like any other day. Work doesn't take vacations." For many, it seemed a purposeless cruelty, but no one dared to question. Thomas was known for his rigidity, and confronting him would only bring negative consequences. Thomas arrived early at the office, as always, with impeccable posture and a serious expression. He entered through the main door, ignoring the downcast looks of his employees, and went straight to his office, leaving only a brief order for his assistant. "I want detailed reports from each sector by the end of the day, no excuses." His cutting voice echoed in the already silent environment, like a knife plunging further, the discouragement into the workers' hearts. In the work area, the atmosphere was heavy. Some typed in silence, while others exchanged looks of sadness and frustration. Among them, an employee murmured to a colleague, "I can't believe we are here today. My daughter was so excited to open presents with me, and now she's alone with her grandmother. He knows what he's taking from us, but he doesn't seem to care." The colleague nodded, but kept his gaze fixed on the computer, afraid that Thomas might overhear any complaints. As the day progressed, the environment seemed even gloomier. Thomas, however, walked the corridors as if nothing was out of the ordinary. He occasionally stopped to check the work, criticizing anything he considered below standard. "This is late," he said to an employee, without even looking at the man. "Do you think that's acceptable? Fix it now. I don't want to hear if it's Christmas. Here, only results matter." At lunchtime, the workers sat at their places, silently eating the meals brought from home or ordered by app. There were no lights, decorations, or laughter. It was a day like any other, or perhaps worse. The feeling of emptiness pervaded the environment, and each employee seemed lost in their own thoughts, lamenting the precious hours they could have been spending with their families. Thomas, observing from the window of his office, noticed the mood but deliberately ignored it. "Sentimentalism doesn't pay the bills," he muttered to himself, as if trying to justify his decision. However, something in his chest began to weigh. The image of the girl on the street the night before came back to his mind, along with the memory of how he himself had once been ignored in a moment of despair. He shook his head, pushing the thoughts away. Work is what matters. There is no room for distractions. On that Christmas night, December 25th, Thomas finally left the company. The exhausting workday had ended, but the emptiness inside him remained. As he walked the deserted city streets, enveloped by the cold and darkness, he saw the reflections of Christmas lights blinking in some windows, creating a contrast between the warmth of happy homes and the loneliness that accompanied him. As he passed a corner, Thomas stopped abruptly. There in the dim light of a street lamp was the same girl he had humiliated the night before. She was walking slowly, head down, her hesitant steps as if she was on the verge of exhaustion. Thomas watched her for a moment, his harsh words echoing in his mind. He felt a growing discomfort in his chest, something he had been trying to ignore since first seeing her. Not knowing exactly why, Thomas began to follow her. He kept a certain distance, but did not take his eyes off her. With each step he took, he noticed more details. The thin coat that barely protected her from the cold, the worn shoes that didn't seem suitable for the snow, and the way she held her arms against her chest, trying to keep warm. Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in years, a mixture of guilt and compassion. The girl walked through narrow, poorly lit streets, passing simple houses and dilapidated buildings. Thomas wondered where she could be going. She's just a child, he thought, the weight of conscience growing with each step. What is she doing alone in this cold on this night? Finally, Odette stopped in front of a small, poorly maintained house. The windows were covered with cardboard, and the door looked crooked as if it were about to fall. He stood there for a few minutes, not knowing what to do. His heart was heavy, and his mind full of questions. "Is this her house?" he muttered to himself. "How can someone live like this? And where are the adults responsible for her?" Thomas looked at the house again, the warmth emanating from the chimneys of the other residences, completely absent from that structure. He couldn't shake the image of the girl walking alone in the cold, the expression on her face when she asked for help, and the cruel words he had said. Thomas took a deep breath, fighting the wave of emotions that was beginning to overwhelm him. Something within him said he couldn't just walk away. He took a hesitant step towards the door, not knowing exactly what he would do or say, but feeling that, for the first time in a long time, he needed to do the right thing. Thomas remained motionless beside the rusty gate of the house, the night's cold hardly bothering him in the face of the tension he felt. He could still hear the girl's light footsteps inside the house, followed by the sound of a door opening. For a moment, everything fell silent, but then a gruff, aggressive voice broke the tranquility of the night. "Finally, you ungrateful girl. Where have you been?" the man shouted from inside the house, his voice laden with irritation. "Did you think you could stay wandering around while I waited here? What did you get, huh? Show me." Thomas froze in place. That voice, it was both strange and familiar, like an echo from a past he had spent his life trying to bury. He approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the entrance of the house. When the man finally appeared in the doorway, illuminated by the faint light from inside, Thomas felt as if the ground had disappeared from beneath his feet. It was Magnus. The aged face, the deep wrinkles and the white hair didn't hide the identity of the man who years ago had destroyed his childhood. Even after so many years, Thomas recognized those features, those cold, hardened eyes. It was like looking into a dark mirror of the past. Thomas took a step back, his heart pounding erratically as if it were about to explode in his chest. His eyes were fixed on Magnus's figure, but his mind seemed to travel years into the past, reliving moments he had buried deep in his memory. "It can't be," he muttered, the words almost getting lost in the silent snow around him. He tried to shake off the shock that overwhelmed him, but Magnus's voice, cutting and cruel, was like a blade tearing his soul, bringing back the screams and threats that had haunted him throughout his childhood. As Thomas watched, Odette backed away, her small, uncertain steps reflecting the fear he knew so well. "You came back with nothing?" Magnus roared, the fury in his voice growing with each word. He took a step forward, his body swaying slightly from the alcohol but still intimidating. "Do you think I give you a roof and food for free? Isn't it enough that you're a burden? Now you can't even beg for money properly? You're useless, girl. Useless." Odette opened her hands, showing they were empty, as silent tears streamed down her face. Her mouth moved as if she wanted to say something, but fear silenced her. Thomas recognized that look, that desperation. It was the same one he saw in the mirror as a child. He felt a lump tighten in his throat, and his breathing grew heavy. The anger and pain grew within him, like a wave about to overflow. Clenching his fist so tightly that his nails almost cut his skin, Thomas struggled to maintain control. His body trembled, but not just from the cold. It was as if all the memories he had tried to bury were surfacing at once. Every word from Magnus was an echo of the past, of the nights when he himself was called useless, humiliated and reduced to nothing. He recognized that scene because he had lived through something very similar. And now there was Magnus perpetuating the same cycle of cruelty with another defenseless child. "I thought he was dead, or in jail," Thomas whispered, almost as if he were trying to convince himself that it couldn't be real. How can he still be here doing this again? His breathing was heavy, and his eyes stung with a mixture of cold and unshed tears. That man he saw at the door was the same one who had broken him so many times, who had turned his childhood into a living hell. And now, it seemed that nothing had changed. He looked at Odette, so small, so vulnerable, so much like the boy he had once been. Part of him wanted to barge into that house, yell at Magnus, take her away and protect her from all harm. But another part was paralyzed, as if the shadow of the past still had power over him, suffocating any reaction. His feet were rooted to the ground, and his body seemed divided between anger and fear. Thomas took a deep breath, his lungs burning with the cold air as Magnus's voice continued to echo through the night. He saw the man's hand rise, and although Magnus did nothing more than point, the gesture made him recoil again, as if he were still the child who had suffered so much. He never changed, Thomas thought, anger growing with every second. He'll never change. Thomas remained there, motionless, fighting against his own memories and the desire to intervene. Something inside him knew he couldn't just walk away this time. He had to do something. But in the face of the man who symbolized everything he had tried to forget, he didn't know where to begin. The sound of Odette's sobs broke the silence of the night, and Thomas felt time was running out. Thomas, unable to contain the rage that seethed within him, took a step forward, feeling his blood pounding in his ears. He looked at the door of the house, Magnus's voice and Odette's sobs resonating like an unbearable provocation. Without a second thought, he raised his foot and delivered a strong kick to the door, which burst open with a bang, slamming against the wall. The sound echoed through the small house, silencing everyone inside. Magnus turned abruptly, his eyes wide with surprise, and the hard expression he had worn now taken over by a flash of fear and confusion. Odette, leaning against the wall, still held back her tears as she watched the stranger enter with firm steps. Thomas pointed his finger at Magnus's face, his gaze fixed and filled with hatred. "So this is where you are, isn't it, Magnus?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Or rather, Harlan. Because changing your name is what you do, isn't it? Running away like the coward you've always been." Odette looked at Thomas with a mixture of fear and confusion. He's called Harlan," she said, her voice trembling, trying to understand what was happening. "You're mistaken. He's my father." Thomas gave a bitter laugh, the sound full of irony and anger. "His father," he said, turning to the girl with eyes burning with indignation. "That man is nothing but a monster. He only changed his name to escape the police, justice, and everything that should have caught up with him a long time ago." Magnus, who was initially paralyzed, began to regain his composure. He took a step forward, his expression hardening again. "Who the hell do you think you are to invade my house like this?" he growled, trying to impose the authority he used to use to intimidate. "I don't know what you're talking about. Are you crazy, boy? Get out of here before I call the police." Thomas didn't back down. In fact, he took another step towards Magnus, now almost touching the man's chest with his index finger. "Call the police? That's rich, coming from someone who's spent his life running from them," he retorted with an acidic tone. "I know who you are. I'd recognize you anywhere. You may have changed your name, but you're the same man who destroyed my childhood. And now, you're doing the same to this girl, aren't you?" Magnus blinked a few times, clearly shaken by Thomas's determination. The silence between them was cutting, as if the air around had become dense and impossible to breathe. But then, as if deciding that denial was the best strategy, Magnus let out a sarcastic, forced laugh that echoed through the small room. "You're delusional, boy," he said, his tone dripping with contempt as he crossed his arms, trying to regain control of the situation. "I don't know who you think I am, but you're getting things mixed up. Now get out of my house before this gets worse for you." Thomas didn't react immediately, but his gaze, fixed and piercing, seemed to cut through Magnus like a blade. He took a step forward, further reducing the distance between them. "Delusional?" he repeated, his voice low and controlled, but charged with a fury on the verge of exploding. "I've spent my entire life trying to bury the memories you left me. Years trying to convince myself I was strong enough to move on. And now here you are, pretending to be someone else, but committing the same acts of cruelty, as if nothing has changed." Magnus stared at him, trying to maintain his composure, but there was something in Thomas's eyes that seemed stronger than any threat he could offer. "You don't know anything, boy," he retorted, his voice faltering slightly. "If you really know me, you know I'm not someone to mess with. Now get the hell out of here while you still can." Thomas ignored the provocation, moving closer. His voice grew firmer, almost a growl. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here because I've spent my life waiting for the moment to look into your eyes and make you pay for everything you've done. There's no room for lies or excuses, Magnus. I know exactly who you are. I'd recognize you anywhere." He turned abruptly to Odette, who was still huddled against the wall, her eyes wide, as if trying to make sense of the scene unfolding before her. "He doesn't care about you, girl," Thomas said, pointing at Magnus. His voice softened, but the weight of his words remained. "He's just using you. He sees you as disposable, just like he saw me. I know this because I've been you. I've heard those same words, felt that same fear, and I know what comes next." Magnus began to move slowly, his hand reaching toward the table where a small gleaming object lay under the faint light of the lamp. Thomas noticed the movement immediately. With the swiftness of someone who already knew Magnus's tricks, he lunged forward, grabbing the man by the collar before he could reach what he was looking for. The force with which Thomas pulled him almost made him lose his balance. "How you think you can still control the situation, don't you?" Thomas growled, their faces now so close he could smell the alcohol on Magnus's breath. "I didn't come here to talk, Magnus. I'm not that boy you thought you could destroy anymore. I'm someone who can finally make you face what you deserve." His voice was low, but each word was charged with threat, like a sentence that had already been pronounced. Magnus tried to break free, but Thomas's strength held him in place. He laughed nervously, but fear was beginning to show on his expression. "You think you're better than me, boy?" he spat, trying to regain his composure. "You're here, invading my home, acting like an animal. Not so different from me after all, are you?" Thomas tightened his grip on Magnus's collar, his hands trembling with restrained anger. "The difference between us is that I would never hurt someone who depends on me. Never treat a child the way you treated me, the way you're treating her," he shot back, nodding his head toward Odette, who was still watching the scene, paralyzed. Thomas released Magnus abruptly, causing him to stumble backward. He took a step back, still breathing heavily, as the memories of his past and the reality of that night collided in his mind. Odette let out a small sigh of relief, but Magnus's gaze, even shaken, still carried a challenge. "And what are you going to do now, boy? Turn me into the cops? Beat me up? Go on, prove you're just like me." Magnus's words echoed in Thomas's mind, but this time he didn't know whether to respond or act. Odette, still leaning against the wall, watched the scene with teary, confused eyes. She finally mustered the courage to speak, her voice trembling but charged with hurt. You're no better than he is," she said, looking directly at Thomas. "You saw me on the street, told me to learn that no one would help me. You humiliated me, You're only here because you're angry at him. But what about me? You didn't come for me." The girl's words hit Thomas like a punch in the gut. He averted his gaze for a moment, the words echoing in his mind. Before he could respond, Magnus let out a hoarse, bitter laugh. "I warned you, girl. He's no different from me. He's here thinking he's the hero, but the truth is he's just like me," he said, pointing a shaky finger at Thomas. "He wants to bring me down, but only because he can't face who he really is." Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of both their accusations. He looked at Odette, his eyes filled with remorse. "You're right," he said, his voice low but firm. "I was wrong. I failed you last night, and there's no excuse for that. I was selfish and blind, but I won't make the same mistake again." He extended his hand to the girl, his gaze now determined. "Let's get out of here. You don't have to stay with him anymore." Magnus stepped forward, his expression hardened by anger and defiance. "You think you can just take her away?" he roared, gripping Thomas's arm tightly. "She's not going anywhere. Who do you think you are to take something of mine? I'm the only one who takes care of her." Thomas turned around, forcefully pulling his arm away to free himself, but without hurting Magnus. "Take care?" he repeated, his voice full of contempt. "You don't know the meaning of that word. All you do is destroy those around you. You won't do that to her." Magnus tried to grab Thomas again, but this time, Thomas firmly pushed him away, moving the man back with a rough shove. However, as soon as Thomas took a step back, his body faltered. He brought a hand to his chest, his face suddenly turning pale. "What?" Thomas murmured, his voice coming out low as he felt a sharp tightness in his chest. He staggered backward, breathing with difficulty, his legs failing as he tried to remain standing. "Mr. Thomas!" Odette cried out, her eyes wide as she ran towards him. She held his arm, trying to prevent him from falling completely to the ground, but it was clear he was losing his strength. Magnus, watching the scene with a mixture of surprise and hesitation, crossed his arms and let out a bitter laugh. "Ah, the great savior can't even bear the weight of his own conscience," he said, his tone laden with contempt. "Maybe it's the universe putting things in their place." Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, trying to ignore both the pain in his chest and Magnus's words. He took a deep breath, but the air seemed not to fully enter his lungs. "No, I'll be fine," he murmured, trying to recompose himself. He looked at Odette, who was clearly frightened. "Let's get out of here now." "You're not okay," Odette replied, her voice trembling as tears began to stream down her face. She held onto Thomas's arm tightly, as if afraid to let go. "You need help." Magnus shook his head dismissively. "Leave him, girl. He wanted to play the hero, and look where it got him. It won't last much longer." He took a step back, crossing his arms, as Thomas desperately tried to catch his breath. With effort, Thomas took Odette's hand, looking directly into her eyes. "I'm not leaving you here, no matter what," he said, his voice weakened, but still filled with determination. "You deserve more than this, and I'll make sure you get it." Odette hesitated for a moment, looking at Magnus, who simply shook his head as if to say she had no choice but to stay. But she knew, deep down, that Thomas was the only one who seemed to truly care. "Okay," she whispered, holding Thomas's hand tightly. As they began to leave, Magnus stepped forward, gripping Thomas's arm forcefully. "You think you can take her away like this? She's not going anywhere," he shouted, his eyes blazing with anger. Thomas, even in his weakened state, mustered all his remaining strength and pulled his arm away with a rough motion, causing Magnus to stumble back a few steps. "She's not your possession," Thomas shouted, his voice coming out strained but firm. "She has the right to a better life, and you won't stop her." With that, he started walking, pulling Odette along, each step a challenge against the pain constricting his chest. As they made their way down the dark, cold street, Thomas felt his body failing more with every minute. He needed to get to a safe place, not just for the girl, but for himself. Odette looked at him worriedly, as the man who had just saved her life struggled to remain standing. In the first days at Thomas's mansion, Odette felt like an intruder. The luxury around her contrasted brutally with the peeling walls and cold floor of Magnus's house. The vastness of the mansion seemed to swallow her, and although she had new clothes, a comfortable room, and food on the table, Odette still carried the weight of fear and mistrust. No matter how much Thomas had made the decision to take her out of that situation, there was something about his demeanor that made it clear he didn't exactly know what he was doing. Thomas, on the other hand, also felt out of place. He had promised himself that he would make a difference in Odette's life, but it was clear that being a father figure or even a comforting presence did not come naturally to him. He still carried within himself the hardness of years of suffering and, above all, the trauma of his childhood. As much as he wanted to change, the transformation was not as simple as he had expected. On the first morning, Thomas entered the kitchen and found Odette sitting silently, pushing away the remains of a breakfast she was clearly not used to eating. He tried to be kind, but his words sounded forced. "Is everything okay? If you don't like what was served, we can change the menu," he said, sitting at the table with a newspaper in his hands. He didn't even look directly at the girl, focusing on the pages, as if he wanted to avoid any deeper interaction. Odette shrugged, fidgeting with her plate. "It's okay," she replied softly without looking up. For her, Thomas's kindness seemed like a mask, something he wore because he thought it was the right thing to do, but not because he really cared. The silence between the two was uncomfortable, and Thomas soon finished his coffee, getting up with a sigh. "I have work to do. If you need anything, ask Maria," he said, referring to the house's housekeeper. Odette nodded, but inside she felt even more out of place. The mansion seemed huge and cold, and Thomas, although he was responsible for taking her out of Magnus's house, didn't seem capable of offering the human warmth she so desperately needed. In the following days, the dynamic between the two didn't improve much. Thomas spent most of his time locked in his office, immersed in piles of work. When they met, the conversations were brief and emotionless. He would superficially ask how she was, and she would respond with the same monotony, not really believing that he cared. For both of them, living together seemed more like an obligation than a genuine relationship. It was only on the third night that something began to change. Odette was in the mansion's garden, looking at the stars, when Thomas appeared, bringing a cup of tea. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, in silence. After a while, he finally spoke, his voice softer than before. "I used to do this when I was a child," he said, looking at the sky. "Stare at the stars. It was the only thing that made me feel there was something bigger, something beyond what I was living." Odette turned to him, surprised by the confession. "You also had a difficult life?" she asked, her voice hesitant but full of curiosity. Thomas took a deep breath, thinking before answering. "I did," he said, without going into details. "And maybe that's why I'm not very good at this, taking care of someone. I never had anyone who took care of me." Odette fell silent, absorbing those words. For the first time, she saw something more in Thomas beyond coldness and authority. He seemed human, vulnerable. "I think you're trying," she said with a small smile. "And that's already something." Those words stuck in Thomas's mind. He wasn't used to receiving compassion or thinking of himself as someone who deserved redemption. But Odette, even being so young, seemed to see something in him that he himself didn't see. In the following days, Thomas began to make small efforts to get closer to her. He took her for walks in the garden, explaining about some of the plants that grew there. Although he had no longer cultivated the same attachment to flowers as before, he realized that the garden was a place where he could find a connection with Odette. He taught her to plant some seedlings, and although he was visibly awkward at being didactic, the girl seemed to appreciate the gesture. Once, while working in the soil, Odette looked at Thomas and asked, "Why did you take me out of there if you didn't even know me?" Thomas stopped what he was doing, wiping his hands on his pants before answering. "Because I saw something in you," he said, looking at her seriously, "something I knew very well. No one deserves to go through what you were going through. No one." Odette didn't respond immediately, but the small smile on her face made it clear that those words meant a lot to her. The relationship between the two continued to evolve slowly. Thomas still had moments of coldness and impatience, especially when something at work stressed him out, but gradually he began to prioritize his time with Odette. He started asking about her stories, her memories, her dreams. And although she was reserved at first, she began to open up more, telling about the few happy moments she had lived before being adopted by Magnus. One night, while they were both in the living room, Odette shyly asked, "Do you think it's too late for me to have a normal life?" Thomas looked at her, feeling a pang in his chest. He knew his answer would be more important than anything he had ever said. "No," he replied firmly. It's never too late. You have a whole life ahead of you, and I'll do my best to make it as normal and happy as possible." That promise marked a turning point for Thomas. He realized that by helping Odette, he was also helping himself. He began to put aside his rigidity and gradually allowed himself to be more human, more accessible. He began to notice the small details, the way Odette frowned when she was concentrated, or how she laughed discreetly when she found something funny. He realized that despite everything she had been through, the girl still carried a light that he could not ignore. Thomas entered the police station on a cold and grey morning with a mixture of determination and restlessness. Since he had taken Odette out of Magnus's house, he felt that the chapter was not closed. Magnus's figure still loomed in his mind as a threatening shadow, and Thomas knew he needed answers. As he approached the service counter, his tone was firm but controlled. "I would like to know about Magnus's case, or Harlan, as he introduces himself now. He was responsible for the girl who is now in my care," Thomas said, crossing his arms as he waited for the response. The officer, a heavy-set man with a tired expression, looked at Thomas with curiosity before searching through some papers in the system. "Magnus, or Harlan? Yes, we have a record of him," the officer said, adjusting his glasses as he read. "But it seems he escaped from the registered address. When our men arrived there, the house was empty. He must have abandoned the place shortly after you took the girl." Thomas felt his stomach churn. The idea of Magnus still being on the loose deeply disturbed him. "Is he being searched for?" he asked, trying to remain calm, though the tension was evident in his voice. "Yes," replied the officer. "But so far we have no concrete clues as to where he might be. If you know anything, report it immediately. He is dangerous, especially considering what was reported about the girl's case." Thomas nodded, thanking him before leaving the police station. Outside, the cold wind hit him, but he barely noticed. His mind was full of worries. What if he comes back? What if he tries to hurt Odette again? He thought as he walked through the busy streets. He felt a weight in his chest, a pressure that seemed to grow with every step. But it wasn't just emotional tension. It was something more. Thomas had been feeling physical discomfort in recent weeks. A mild but constant pain in his chest, and a fatigue that didn't seem normal. Initially, he ignored it, blaming stress and overwork. But that day, the pressure seemed more intense, almost suffocating. He decided that after the police station he would go to the doctor. He could no longer put it off. At the office, Thomas sat in the waiting room, watching the people around him. He tried to push negative thoughts away, but the possibility that something was wrong haunted him. When he was called by the doctor, he took a deep breath and entered, ready to face whatever it was. The doctor, a middle-aged man with a calm and professional expression, listened carefully to the symptoms Thomas described. After quick examinations and a long conversation, the doctor's expression changed, becoming more serious. "Mr. Thomas, the symptoms you described, along with the preliminary test results, indicate something concerning. We will need to perform more tests to confirm, but there are signs of a serious heart condition." Thomas was silent for a few seconds, trying to process what he was hearing. "Serious?" he repeated, the word echoing in his mind. "How serious?" The doctor sighed, choosing his words carefully. "We still need more detailed results, but there is a chance that it could be something life-threatening, especially if not treated properly. I recommend you get the additional tests done as soon as possible." The ground seemed to dissolve under Thomas's feet. He left the office in a daze, his mind spiraling. The possibility of facing a serious illness was something he had never considered, and now more than ever, he felt the weight of his responsibilities. As he walked back home, Odette's face came to his mind. She was finally starting to feel safe, to trust him. And now, just when he felt he could offer her something good, his own life seemed to crumble. Thomas stopped in the middle of the street, clutching his chest as a wave of conflicting emotions hit him. Thomas took a deep breath, looking up at the cloudy sky above. He knew he needed strength, not only to face what was to come, but also to protect Odette, even if it meant hiding from her what was happening. "I can't fail her," he thought, clenching his fists and resuming his path. The next morning, Thomas was sitting in his study, looking out the window as the sun lit up the garden. He knew he needed to make important decisions before it was too late. When the doorbell rang, Thomas slowly got up and walked to the door, where the lawyer awaited with a folder in hand. It was time to put everything on paper. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas," the lawyer said in a formal tone. "I've brought all the documents we discussed. Are you ready to begin?" Thomas nodded, letting the lawyer in. They sat in the living room, the table between them covered with papers and contracts. Thomas took a deep breath before speaking. "I want to make sure that if anything happens to me, Odette doesn't have to go through the same difficulties I went through. I want everything I have to go to her." The lawyer took detailed notes as Thomas explained his intentions. He asked that the money be placed in a fund to ensure Odette's education and that the mansion become a home for her, should he no longer be around. "She deserves a decent life," Thomas said, his eyes fixed on the papers. "Something I never had, and that until recently I didn't know how to provide to anyone." After hours of reviewing and signing the documents, the lawyer carefully put everything in his briefcase. "It's all ready, Mr. Thomas. If you need anything else, I'm at your disposal." Thomas accompanied him to the door, feeling relieved to have taken the first step to secure Odette's future. But he knew he needed to do more. During the night, he reflected on his years as a boss, remembering how he had treated his employees with coldness and insensitivity. He saw them as cogs in a machine, not as people. That had to change. He decided that before his condition worsened, he would do what he could to correct those mistakes. On the following day, Thomas picked up the phone and started making calls. One by one, he contacted the employees he had fired on the fateful night when they were surprised with a Christmas party. Some answered cautiously, others with disbelief. "Mr. Thomas," some said, surprised to hear his voice. "Why are you calling me?" "I made a mistake," Thomas said in a sincere tone. "I was insensitive and unfair to you. I want to apologize and invite you back to the company. The doors are open, and I want you to know that things will be different from now on." For many, the surprise quickly turned into gratitude. Some accepted the invitation immediately, while others needed more time to believe that Thomas had really changed. But Thomas did not give up. He made sure to visit those who did not respond to the calls, appearing in person at their homes or temporary workplaces. In each conversation, Thomas strived to demonstrate that he was speaking from the heart. He shared part of his story, explaining how his life had been shaped by trauma and how that had made him the rigid person they knew. "I cannot change the past," he told a former employee who, with tears in her eyes, accepted to come back. "But I can try to build something better from now on, and that starts with you." When the first employees started to return to the company, the atmosphere was completely different. Thomas made sure to greet them personally every day, asked about their families, and participated in meetings with more empathy. He became accessible, a boss who really cared, and the employees began to notice the difference. The following week, Thomas organized a general meeting. He got up on the makeshift stage in the company's auditorium, his eyes scanning the face of each employee. "I know that for a long time I failed you," he began, his voice firm but laden with emotion. "I treated you as if you were numbers, when, in fact, you are the heart of this company. I want you to know that I am committed to changing, and this is not just a promise, it is a commitment." The room was met with timid applause, which quickly grew in intensity. Many still did not fully believe, but were willing to give him a second chance. When he returned home that night, Thomas sat in the garden with Odette. He watched the stars as she watered some plants they had planted together. "Do you think it's too late for people to change?" he asked, his voice quiet. Odette looked at him with a smile. "I don't think so, Mr. Thomas. You're changing, aren't you? So that means it's never too late." Thomas smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope. He knew there was still much to be done, both for Odette and the others, but for the first time in years, he felt he was on the right path. That night, Thomas was sitting in the living room looking at the crackling fire in the fireplace. Odette was on the floor, organizing some pieces of a puzzle, but the atmosphere was silent, almost heavy. Thomas knew he could not postpone that conversation any longer. He had received confirmation from the doctors. His condition was serious, and the surgery would be risky. But without it, his chances of survival were minimal. He took a deep breath before calling out to Odette. "Odette, can you come here for a moment? I need to talk to you," he said, his voice laden with a seriousness she rarely heard. The girl got up immediately, sitting beside him on the couch, her large eyes attentive. "What is it, Mr. Thomas? You seem worried," she asked, tilting her head slightly. Thomas tried to smile, but the gesture came out forced. He held Odette's hands, feeling how small and fragile they were, yet full of life. "Odette, I need to tell you something important," he began, carefully choosing his words. "In the past few days, I went to the doctor and found out I have a serious health problem, something that, if not treated soon, could end me." Odette's eyes widened, and she immediately shook her head in denial. "No, that can't be true," she said, her voice trembling. "You're fine. You don't look sick. You're lying, aren't you?" "I wish I were," Thomas replied, his voice choked. He took a deep breath before continuing. "The doctor said I need to undergo surgery, but this surgery is risky and there's no guarantee that I'll make it out of it." Odette felt her heart tighten. Tears began to well up in her eyes as she tried to process what she was hearing. "But what if it goes wrong? What if you don't come back?" she asked, the fear evident in her voice. "I don't want to be alone again. I don't want to lose you too." Thomas squeezed her hands, his eyes fixed on hers. "Odette, I know this is scary. It's scary for me too. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I've done everything I can to ensure that you're safe, that you have a good life, even if I'm no longer here." "Don't say that," Odette cried, tears now streaming freely. "You'll come back, I know you will. You can't leave me like that. You can't promise to take care of me and then go away." Thomas felt the tears burn in his own eyes, but he remained firm. He knew he needed to be honest with her, even if it was painful. "Odette, I don't plan on going anywhere. I will fight. I will do everything I can to come back. But if something goes wrong, I need you to know that you're not alone, that you're strong enough to keep going." Odette fell into Thomas's arms, sobbing as he held her firmly. He felt the weight of her fear, the same fear he knew so well, the fear of being abandoned, of having no one. He stroked her hair, letting the moment linger, allowing her to release all the pain she felt. After a few minutes, she pulled back slightly, still sniffling. "And when is the surgery?" she asked, her voice lower now. "In a few days," Thomas replied in a calm tone. "I want you to be prepared, Odette. I want you to know that everything I've done until now has been with you in mind. You are important to me, more important than I could ever have imagined." She nodded, wiping away her tears. "I just want you to come back," she said, with a determination that seemed greater than her age. I'll pray every day for you to come back, because I don't want to lose you." Thomas smiled, finally allowing a few tears to fall from his eyes. "Thank you, Odette. Your prayers will give me strength, and I promise I'll do everything I can to come back to you." As the night wore on, the two remained together, finding comfort in each other's company. But the shadow of the approaching surgery loomed over them both, a test that sometimes love requires courage in the face of the unknown. One day later, the operating room was shrouded in silence, save for the rhythmic sound of the heart monitors and medical equipment. Thomas lay on the operating table, completely sedated. The doctors worked with precision, performing the first part of the delicate procedure that could save his life. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, but an unforeseen event forced the team to pause momentarily. The doctors quickly stepped out to prepare the next necessary equipment, leaving Thomas vulnerable, alone, and unconscious. It was at that moment that a figure emerged from the shadows of the hallway, moving stealthily into the room. It was Magnus. He was dressed in ordinary clothes, but his predatory smile betrayed his intentions. He approached the operating table, looking down at Thomas's now pale and motionless face. With a look of contempt and superiority, Magnus leaned close to Thomas's ear and began to speak, his voice low and venomous. "Look at you," Magnus murmured with a cold smile. "The great Thomas, the man who took everything from me. You think you're a hero, don't you? Saving little Odette, playing the Good Samaritan, but you're weak just like you were as a child. And now you're at the mercy of fate and my plan." Magnus took a step back, surveying Thomas's face with a sickening satisfaction. "I know about the will," he continued, his voice full of malice. "I know you left everything to that girl. That was a mistake, Thomas. Because you see, I'm going to make sure she's mine. No matter what I have to do, I'm going to adopt her. And when I do, guess who will be in control of that fortune?" He let out a soft laugh, a sound that cut through the silence like a knife. "You think you're protecting Odette, but really you're handing everything over to me." And the best part is, you can't do a thing to stop it. Not now, not ever. For a moment, Magnus fell silent, tilting his head as if savoring the sight of Thomas's helpless form. "I'm going to make sure you don't make it out of this surgery," he whispered, with a cruel smile. "But even if you do manage to survive, it'll be too late. I'll already have everything that's yours." Thomas, though sedated and unable to move or react, seemed to sense the weight of Magnus's presence. Somewhere deep inside him, his consciousness fought against the stupor, straining to respond to the poison being poured over him, but his body remained motionless, unable to respond. Magnus took one more step toward the door, looking back at Thomas one last time. "Goodbye, boy. Or should I say never again." With that, he slipped out of the room as stealthily as he had entered, disappearing down the hallway like a shadow. When the doctors returned to the room, everything seemed as it had before. They continued with the procedure, oblivious to the sinister visit Thomas had just received. Meanwhile, Thomas, trapped in his unconsciousness, battled an enemy that seemed more dangerous than the surgery itself. Back at the mansion, the night seemed to drag on as Odette waited anxiously for news of Thomas. She was seated in the armchair in the living room, hugging a pillow, her gaze fixed on the window. Outside, the wind rustled the branches of the trees, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The silence of the house felt heavy, almost oppressive. She wanted to believe that everything would be all right, that Thomas would return safe and sound, but the tightness in her chest said otherwise. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed down the hallway. Odette frowned, rising slowly. "Mr. Thomas?" she called out, her voice laced with hope but also apprehension. The sound of approaching footsteps made her heart race. When the figure finally emerged in the doorway, she froze. It was Magnus. "You?" Odette exclaimed, shock and fear etched on her face. She took a step back, feeling panic rise within her. "What are you doing here?" Magnus closed the door behind him with chilling calm, locking it with an audible click. He looked at Odette with a cold smile, his eyes glinting with a mixture of determination and malice. "Shut up, girl," he said, his voice low but loaded with threat. "Now you're going to listen to what I have to say." Odette swallowed hard but stood her ground. "I don't want to hear anything from you," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "You shouldn't be here. Leave now, or I'll call the police." Magnus let out a bitter laugh, folding his arms as he took a step toward her. "Police? Ah, my dear, who do you think will believe you? I just came to get what is rightfully mine, or rather, what you now have because of that useless Thomas." He shook his head with disdain, his eyes fixed on her. "Do you really think he'll come back? Do you think he can take care of you? He can barely take care of himself." "He saved me," Odette replied firmly, though her voice betrayed the fear she felt. "He is far better than you ever were or will be. He cares about me. You never cared about anyone." Magnus narrowed his eyes, his expression hardening. "I'll take care of you now," he said, his tone chilling. "I'll make sure you have everything you need, and in return I'll manage that little fortune he left you. With me, you'll have a life you never imagined. So how about you stop resisting and accept reality?" Odette took another step back, shaking her head vehemently. "I will never trust you," she declared, her voice firmer now. "You only want the money. You don't care about me. And I know that because you never truly cared for me. You only wanted to use me, as always." Magnus approached quickly, causing Odette to back up until she was against the wall. "Look here, girl," he said, his voice low and full of threat. "You have no choice. Thomas made you believe you can be independent, but the truth is you need me, and I'll make sure you understand that, whether you like it or not." Odette looked at him, fear evident in her eyes, but also a spark of defiance. "I will never let you control me again," she said, her fists clenched. "I will fight and you will never get what you want." Magnus smiled, as if her words were only a minor provocation. "We'll see, girl. We'll see." He took a step back, observing her carefully. "You may not like it, but in the end I always get what I want." He began to walk around the room, examining the space with an air of ownership, while Odette, filled with fear and determination, tried to think of how to escape. Odette, trembling, still leaning against the wall, stared at Magnus with a mixture of fear and anger. "I'll tell the police," she declared, her voice shaky but full of determination. "They'll know you're here and that you're dangerous. You won't get away with this. Magnus let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking his head as if amused by the idea. "Tell the police," he said, approaching her once more. "And what do you think will happen? That they'll arrest me and you'll be free, happy and protected with your dear Thomas?" Odette tried not to back away further, but Magnus seemed to grow in front of her, his threatening presence suffocating. "Yes," she replied, her voice stronger than she felt inside. "They'll get you and you'll never be able to hurt anyone again." Magnus's laughter echoed through the room, but this time there was no humor in it. He leaned forward until he was at Odette's level, and his cold eyes met hers. "You think this is a game, girl? Listen closely to what I'm about to say. If you open that mouth to the police and if I get arrested, I swear Thomas won't make it out alive. He may even survive the surgery, but he won't last long after that." Magnus's words were like poison, every syllable laden with threat. Odette choked on the declaration, her heart racing. You can't do that," she said, her voice failing. "You can't hurt him again. He took you out of my life. He saved me. Leave him alone." Magnus shrugged, as if her plea was irrelevant. "I can do whatever I want. Thomas thinks he's untouchable, but no one is, especially him, so weak and full of guilt. He took everything from me, and now I'm going to give it back to him in the worst possible way. So think hard before you open that mouth, because if you talk, you'll have to live knowing you caused his death." Odette felt the tears begin to stream down, but she didn't want to show weakness. "He's not like you," she said, her voice choked. "He's stronger than you'll ever be, and I won't let you hurt him." Magnus narrowed his eyes, slowly standing up. He crossed his arms, as if he were analyzing her. "You have courage, girl," he said, with an almost admiring tone. "But courage won't protect you, and in the end I always win, so do as I'm telling you. Stay quiet and everyone stays unharmed. Otherwise, you'll learn what it means to lose everything." Magnus turned around, calmly walking through the room as if he had already won. Odette, still leaning against the wall, felt her heart beating so hard it seemed to echo in her ears. She needed to think fast, needed to find a way to protect Thomas and herself from that man who seemed willing to do anything. At the hospital, the atmosphere was tense. Thomas was in the recovery room after a long and delicate surgery. His body was still weak, and every breath seemed like a monumental effort. Doctors and nurses closely monitored his vital signs, aware that he had nearly lost his life during the procedure. The irregular rhythm of the heart monitor for a moment had made everyone hold their breath. But against all odds, Thomas survived. When he finally regained consciousness, his body was heavy, but his mind began to clear gradually. He slowly opened his eyes, seeing the fluorescent lights on the ceiling and the face of a nurse checking the machines by his side. "Mr. Thomas," the nurse said in a reassuring tone, "the surgery was a success, but you need to rest." It was a close call. Thomas shook his head slightly as if he wanted to brush off the nurse. His voice came out weak but charged with urgency. "Need to talk to someone now." "Police," he said, each word an effort. "Now." The nurse hesitated for a moment, but saw the determination in Thomas's eyes. He quickly left the room and called the attending physician, who entered shortly after, trying to convince Thomas not to worry. "Mr. Thomas, you need to rest," said the doctor with a concerned expression. "You are weak and need time to recover." Thomas waved his hand, interrupting him. "No, it's urgent," he insisted, his voice hoarse. "A man named Magnus has the girl. Odette. He is dangerous. Call the police now." The doctor realized Thomas would not yield. He nodded, leaving the room for the nurses to alert the authorities. A few minutes later, police officers arrived at the hospital, entering Thomas's room with seriousness. "Mr. Thomas," said one of the officers, "we received your request. Can you tell us exactly what is happening?" With effort, Thomas explained everything, from Magnus's past to the threat he posed to Odette. "He is manipulative, dangerous," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice steady. "He will try to flee. You need to act quickly." As the officers left to locate Magnus at the mansion, he was already beginning to sense that something was wrong. Odette had remained silent, but her gaze carried something different, a mix of fear and defiance that troubled him. Suddenly he heard the sound of sirens in the distance. His face hardened and he stood up quickly. "What did you do, girl?" he shouted, grabbing Odette by the arm, but without enough strength to hurt her this time. "You called the police, didn't you? You want to ruin everything." Odette tried to break free, her voice firm despite the panic. "I didn't do anything," she said, her eyes shining with determination. "But if they're coming, it's because you deserve it. You'll never hurt anyone again." Magnus swore, realizing he needed to act quickly. He let go of Odette and ran for the door, but before he could leave, the sound of sirens was already closer. He tried to escape through the back, but the police surrounded the property. "Stop!" shouted one of the officers, pointing his gun as Magnus stopped in the middle of the yard. "It's not what it looks like," yelled Magnus, raising his hands. "I didn't do anything." "We know who you are, Magnus," said the officer firmly. "You're under arrest. Hands behind your back." Magnus tried to take another step back, but stumbled and fell. He was handcuffed instantly while yelling protests. "This is a mistake. I'm innocent," he said, but no one was listening. Odette watched from inside the house, tears in her eyes, but not of sadness. They were tears of relief. She knew she was finally free from the man who had terrified her for so long. When the police took Magnus away, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Back at the hospital, Thomas was informed of the arrest. He let out a deep sigh, feeling a mixture of relief and fatigue. "Finally," he murmured with a faint smile, "she's safe." But as Thomas closed his eyes to rest, the shadow of Magnus and everything he represented still lingered in his mind. Thomas knew that, although the immediate danger had passed, the impact of that story was far from over. Months passed since Thomas's surgery. He was recovering slowly, but each day was a victory. Odette's support and the dedication of the doctors helped him overcome the most difficult moments. His health had been tested to the limit, but he was finally out of danger. Deep down, Thomas knew his survival wasn't just a medical matter. It was a reflection of his desire to protect and be present for Odette. When the day came to be discharged, Odette was waiting at the hospital entrance, her eyes shining with happiness. She ran to him as soon as she saw him come out, enveloping him in a tight embrace. "I knew you would come back," she said, with a smile that warmed Thomas's heart. "No matter what happened, I knew you would be okay." Thomas returned the embrace, feeling her warmth and strength. "I came back because you believed in me," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "And now let's go home. Our home." When the car arrived at the mansion, Thomas didn't expect what was to come. As soon as the door opened, he was greeted by an explosion of colorful lights and laughter. All the staff were there, gathered in the garden, with warm smiles and Christmas decorations scattered everywhere. A large Christmas tree stood in the center, carefully and lovingly decorated, and next to it a table full of sweets and festive dishes. "Welcome back, Mr. Thomas," they all said in unison, applauding as he stepped out of the car. Thomas stood still for a moment, his eyes wide with surprise. He looked at Odette, who was smiling conspiratorially. "We wanted you to have a Christmas, even if late," she explained, holding his hand, "because now we have something to truly celebrate." Thomas let out a soft laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. He approached the tree, gently touching one of the ornaments. "You didn't have to do this," he said with an emotional smile. "But thank you, really. It means a lot to me." As the staff approached to greet him and welcome him back, Thomas realized how much his relationship with them had changed. They weren't just employees, they were people he respected and cared about. What had once seemed like just a business now felt like an extension of his family. When everyone gathered around the tree to share stories and laughter, Thomas allowed himself a moment of introspection. He looked at the twinkling lights and remembered his mother, the smell of the food she made at Christmas, the laughter that filled the house, even in difficult times. For a brief instant, the pain of loss returned, but not like before. This time it was accompanied by a sense of peace. "I miss you, Mum," he thought, looking up at the starry sky. "But I know you'd be proud of what I've built, and I promise I'll never forget what really matters again." Odette tugged at Thomas's hand, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Thomas, you have to see the gift we made for you," she said excitedly, leading him to a table where a small present was wrapped in shiny paper. He carefully unwrapped it, revealing a picture frame with a photo of him and Odette, taken in the mansion's garden, both smiling as they planted flowers together. "It's for you to remember that you have a new family now," Odette said, her eyes sparkling, "because I know you saved me, but you also taught me that we can start over." Thomas looked at the photo for a long moment before answering. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Odette," he said sincerely, "and I promise I'll be here for you always." The night continued full of laughter, music, and stories. For the first time in years, Thomas allowed himself to enjoy Christmas without the weight of painful memories. He knew the past would never disappear completely, but now he could look to the future with hope. When the clock struck midnight, Thomas raised his improvised juice glass, his gaze passing over every face that surrounded him. Odette was by his side, with a smile that lit up the night as much as the twinkling lights in the garden. He cleared his throat lightly, calling everyone's attention, and began to speak, his voice laden with emotion. "Life gives us second chances," he began, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "And this is mine. You have no idea how grateful I am that you are all here today, for accepting me and giving me the opportunity to correct so many past mistakes. A few months ago, I didn't believe something like this would be possible. I didn't think I could redeem myself, let alone find a family." He paused, looking at Odette with tenderness. "Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe. Thank you for reminding me of what's important. Because of you, I can confidently say that from now on every Christmas will be special." Applause and laughter erupted in the garden, mingling with the soft sound of bells and the crackle of the fireplace in the distance. Thomas turned to Odette, bending slightly to hug her. He held her tightly, feeling the warmth and security that moment provided. "Thank you, Mr. Thomas," she said, her voice sweet but laden with emotion. "You've changed my life, but I think you've also changed yours." Thomas smiled, running his hand through her hair. "You saved me as much as I saved you, Odette. There's no doubt about that, and I promise I'll always be here for you." As they embraced, the staff surrounded him one by one, congratulating him and thanking him for everything he had done for them in recent months. For Thomas, that simple gesture was proof that he was finally on the right track, a journey that had begun with so many missteps, but was now guided by purpose and love. Under the glow of the Christmas lights, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. The sense of belonging, of being surrounded by people who genuinely cared for him, warmed him more than the cozy night climate itself. He looked up at the sky where the stars shone brightly, and a solitary tear escaped. He thought of his mother, of the painful memories and the Christmases that had always haunted him. But this time, something was different. "Mum," he murmured to himself with a soft smile on his lips, "I hope you're seeing this. I hope you know that I finally understood what you always wanted to teach me. No matter how much life knocks us down, we can always find a way back." Odette pulled him by the hand with enthusiasm, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Thomas, come see. They've put the last stars on top of the tree," she said, her voice full of animation, her eyes shining with an almost childlike joy. Her tiny fingers squeezed his, as if wanting to convey all the energy she felt at that moment. She pointed to the large decorated pine tree in the center of the garden, where the lights twinkled like little fragments of fallen stars from the sky. Thomas, surprised by the girl's contagious vitality, chuckled softly, something he didn't often do. "Let's go then," he replied, allowing himself to be led by her, as if for a brief moment all the weight of his worries had vanished. When they reached the tree, Thomas paused for a moment, allowing himself to observe the details more closely. The ornaments were simple, but they carried a unique beauty. It was evident that they had been made with care, each one seeming to tell a story. Some stars, he noticed, had handwritten messages from the staff: gratitude, hope, family. He leaned in to take a closer look at one that caught his attention in particular: rebirth. His hand gently touched the star, feeling the delicate texture of the paper and reflecting on the meaning behind that word. It was as if the ornament had been placed there for him, as a silent reminder of all that had happened and the possibilities that still lay ahead. "Mr. Thomas, can you help me adjust this last one?" Odette asked, holding out a shiny star in her small hands. Her cheeks flushed from the cold. She looked at him expectantly, her eyes shining with the confidence of someone who knew their request would be granted. Thomas smiled, a sincere smile that seemed to emerge from the depths of his heart, something rare for him. "Of course, Odette. Let's do it together," he replied, carefully taking the star and then lifting the girl effortlessly into his arms. Odette let out a soft laugh as she held the star in place, and together With an almost ceremonial care, they positioned the final ornament on top of the pine tree. When the star was secured, a chorus of applause and laughter echoed through the garden. Thomas gently lowered Odette, still with a smile on his face, and ruffled her hair lightly. "There," he said as the girl's eyes were fixed on the illuminated tree. "Now it's perfect." Odette shook her head vigorously, as if disagreeing. "It's more than perfect, Mr. Thomas. It's magical." Her words carried such pure innocence that they touched Thomas deeply, like a reminder that the true magic of Christmas was not in the decorations or the presents, but in the shared moments and the connections they created together. The celebration continued into the night, illuminated by the lights of the tree and the energy of everyone around. Employees gathered in small groups, sharing stories and laughing at funny anecdotes about the challenges they had faced throughout the year. Thomas, sitting in a chair near the tree, watched it all with a serene smile. He had never felt so present, so connected with others as in that moment. The vibration around seemed almost tangible, filling the air with joy and camaraderie. From time to time, someone would approach Thomas with a sincere smile and words that seemed to carry the entire meaning of that night. Some thanked him for providing that gathering, describing how the environment had brought a new light to their days. Others, more emotional, shared small life stories, moments of overcoming, or simple dreams that still guided them. Thomas listened attentively, leaning slightly forward, as if each word had weight, as if each story were a unique piece of a puzzle that made up that night. He noticed the sparkle in people's eyes as they spoke, a reflection of what the occasion meant to them. And with each new story, he felt a deep connection with those around him, as if for the first time in a long while, he was truly present in the moment. At one point, an older employee with a cane in one hand and a cup of punch in the other approached and asked permission to tell a story. The circle of conversation soon formed around him, and his words, full of humor and nostalgia, quickly captivated everyone. He described a childhood prank involving a bicycle and a dog that ended up leading him to an unexpected bath in the river. Laughter erupted at the end of the account, echoing through the garden like music that blended joy and complicity. Thomas, sitting in his chair near the tree, let himself be carried away by the collective laughter. It was a genuine, unpretentious laugh that came from deep within his chest, almost without control. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed like that. The sound seemed both strange, like something forgotten, and familiar, like an old song he hadn't heard in years. As the night wore on, Thomas realized something that took him by surprise. He felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't the silent peace of an empty room or a solitary moment. It was a peace that was born from connection, from the sense of belonging that came from being surrounded by people who, in different ways, were part of his life. He looked around and saw faces illuminated by the twinkling lights of the tree, smiles that carried stories, gazes that reflected gratitude. Every detail seemed to contribute to that unique atmosphere. The stars at the top of the pine tree blinked as if they were alive, reflecting the dreams and wishes of everyone present. In a moment of pause, Odette sat down beside him, holding a cup of hot chocolate. She looked at him and asked, with the sincerity of a child, "Mr. Thomas, is this the happiest Christmas you've ever had?" Thomas looked at her, surprised by the question, but didn't need to think much before answering. "Yes, Odette, I think it is. Not because it's perfect, but because I finally understood what Christmas really means. It's about being together, overcoming what hurts us, and creating something beautiful. And that's all thanks to you." Odette smiled shyly, leaning on his arm. "I just wanted you to be happy," she said softly, "and I think you succeeded. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to continue bringing exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that is about to appear on your screen. We are immensely grateful to have you here with us. Now you can click on the links that are appearing on the screen right now. We have a special selection just for you, full of valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment. See you there.